Imagine being in a world of your own design in your own head for your whole life, and then one day deciding to eat meat, and then all of a sudden coming out of it, and now you're in a completely different world. And you realize the world that you were in before wasn't the real world. You're in this new world that's now completely foreign to you. So that's what they were describing, and you go on in the chat and people were talking about this, and other people had that experience too. They had autism and their brain was not working right. And then all of a sudden they started eating meat and it started getting better as an adult. Out of Texas A&M University in America, they found that vegans and vegetarians were having higher rates of kids with autism, and that is in the literature as well, as higher rates of autism in vegan and vegetarian families that eat less meat or no meat. And Texas A&M found that one of those seemed to be causative because of a carnitine deficiency. And so people that don't have enough carnitine, their brains don't develop properly, their neurons can't develop properly. And this is important for mitochondrial function and health as well. And so they found that it is the case that carnitine is actually an essential nutrient for a lot of people. Fully 30% of people don't make enough carnitine or any carnitine at all. So I've heard you mention an association between diet and autism spectrum disorder. Can you elaborate? Are there any studies I can take a look at? Thanks. I put a number of studies in the videos that I've done on autism, and there's a lot of associations, and association isn't causation, but at least it's interesting. There's one that had preconception diet, so women that were eating a lot more meat and red meat preconception, so before they got pregnant, had much lower rates of children with autism. Presumably they're not just going to stop doing that during pregnancy and rearing of the child. So who knows about that, but they specifically were talking about preconception. Women that have higher LDL cholesterol and total cholesterol during pregnancy, lower rates of children with autism. That eats higher saturated fat diets during pregnancy, lower rates of kids with autism. Women who breastfeed instead of bottle feed, lower rates of kids with autism. People that now this one I was looking specifically for formula fed versus breastfed, and I couldn't find a study on that. But the bottle fed was the closest one I could get. I was wondering, is sugar going to be a precipitative factor for autism? Because formula fed formulas there's a buttload of sugar added to it, which is not good, I think, and a bunch of seed oils and horrible, nasty crap like that. So this didn't differentiate between people that just express milk and put that in a bottle and use that as well as formula. But most people who bottle feed instead of breastfeed are using formula, because usually people that breast pump, they're also breastfeeding and then they pump as well, and they're sometimes having a bottle. The ones that exclusively bottle feed, they're not breastfeeding at all and they're not pumping at all, and so they're not making milk at all. And so it's much more likely that those people were using formula, and so that group anyway had higher rates of kids with autism. And then out of university, or the Texas A&M University in America, they found that vegans and vegetarians were having higher rates of kids with autism, and that is in the literature as well, as higher rates of autism in vegan and vegetarian families that eat less meat or no meat. And Texas A&M found that one of those seemed to be causative because of a carnitine deficiency. And so people that don't have enough carnitine, their brains don't develop properly, their neurons can't develop properly, and this is important for mitochondrial function and health as well. And so they found that it is the case that carnitine is actually an essential nutrient for a lot of people. Fully 30% of people don't make enough carnitine or any carnitine at all. And so it's non-essential. It doesn't matter. Bullshit. It matters for at least 30% of people, and more in your diet is helpful as well. And so they found that people, vegans and vegetarians, they weren't getting enough carnitine for their kids. And if their kids weren't making enough carnitine, if they were one of these fully 1/3 of humanity that doesn't make enough carnitine, that they were getting these types of autism where the brain wasn't developing properly. And then you have studies of all throughout the literature showing that ketogenic diets in particular, getting rid of carbs and sugar, changes the brain energy and changes the mitochondrial function and patterns in the brain of autistic children and adults, and their brain starts working better. And so there are entire treatment groups. There are doctors and facilities that treat autism with ketogenic diets. Professor Chris Palmer from Harvard, is a professor of psychiatry at Harvard, wrote about this in his book Brain Energy, and we talked about it on our interview that I did with him. If you want to look for that on our channel, we talked a lot about autism, and he was saying that going on ketogenic diets is really important for autistic kids, especially because you have a chance to reverse a lot of the misdevelopment of the brain and develop properly and more healthily than as a kid when your brain is still developing. And so that's when you need to get this. But even as adults, I've spoken to many adults with autism who have significantly improved their lives and their symptoms. One guy, Jonathan Griffiths, who we've done a couple podcasts together, really nice guy. He's a British guy who is a bodybuilder. And we, the subject of autism came up, and he said that he had autism. You would never have guessed this by speaking to him, by the rest of the conversation. I had no idea that he was on the spectrum, but he said that a year ago, before he was doing Carnivore, he would not have been able to have the conversation we were having right now, which is amazing. And I've had people come to me and say, hey, come up to a conference. There's a lady I did a podcast with, Allie. She goes by Allie Carnivore. We did a podcast together on autism and her story with her kid. I'd spoken to her online before, and she came up to me at KetoCon 2 years ago, and she said, this is my son, these are my kids, and said all the hellos, and she said he's a nonverbal autistic, and I was a bit confused. I was like, I'm pretty sure I just heard him talk, and then she said when eating carbohydrates, and so when he doesn't eat carbohydrates, he is completely functional, and then he'll go over to his grandparents' house, and they'll try to buy his love with candies and cookies and things like that, and he'll come back and he won't speak for 4 days. Right. And so that just shuts down his brain. His brain needs ketones. And so then it goes back into ketosis, and all of a sudden his brain works again. And so they got him on Carnivore for probably close to 2 years now. And 6 months ago or so, she told me that she messaged me and said that he tested into the gifted program at school. So he went from being a nonverbal autistic, and that could have been the rest of his life, to now being in the gifted program and actually being able to be functional and a productive, successful adult. I mean, that's an amazing difference you can do for somebody. And it's just from not eating carbohydrates. And I get comments all the time. If people here are suffering with autism or have a family member suffering with autism, please put that in the comments, put that in the chat, and definitely in the comments, because they're more permanent. Tell your story. What's your experience with this? Because it's important for people to get this out there and know it, because if they have a family member and they're just kind of like, well, it's hard to change people's diets, especially when they're autistic. It's difficult, but oh my God, it's worth it. And so the more this gets out there and more people realize just how worth it this is, you can completely change this person's course of their entire life for the better. That it's so important. And however the hell you can do it, by hook or crook, it's so important to do. I've spoken to adults that are autistic and suffer with autism their whole life, and said that that when they eat carbs, they turn nonverbal and they can't speak for days and they just shut off. One person was actually really sad. They were talking about autism. I had a short talking about autism. And you look at the comments. It's a recent short. So go into my shorts and go to the one on autism. Look at the comments. There's a lot of comments on there. People with autism, a family member with autism, and these massive improvements. One was kind of sad, but they said, imagine being in a world of your own design, in your own head, for years, for your whole life, and then one day deciding to eat meat. and then all of a sudden coming out of it, and now you're in a completely different world, and you realize the world that you were in before wasn't the real world, but now you have no skills, you have no family connection, you have no friend connections, you have no this, you have no that, and you're in this new world that's now completely foreign to you, and you don't have any skills and life skills and things like that. I don't have to wonder what that's like, because that's my experience. So that's what they were describing, and you're going in the chat and people were talking about this, and other people had that experience too, was that they had autism and their brain was not working right. And then all of a sudden they started eating meat, and it started getting better as an adult, getting healthier and healthier and healthier. And all of a sudden they're there and they know what's going on now, and their brain's working to an extent that, they see the world around them for what it is, and they realize, shit, I'm 40 years old and I don't have any job skills or life skills. And that's hard. So the earlier you do this, the better. However, there are a lot, like Jonathan, that are adults that have, had autism and completely changed it. And now, he's just living a normal, functional, productive life, which is great. So it makes a massive difference. It makes a massive, massive, massive difference. So anybody with that has this sort of condition or has a family member with it, please give this a try. This is something that can completely change your life, and it can change their life. And it's something that is probably the most important thing that anyone with autism can do. Still have an optimal diet. There may be some people that, according to their ethnic background, have an easier time with inappropriate foods, like people that have had their ancestors, had agriculture for 10,000 years versus Native Americans, Native Australians who've only been exposed to this for a couple hundred years. Yeah, there's going to be